we're very excited to have Mr. J. Michael Hall speak to us again on a very important part of parenting, which is freedom and discipline, how to parent safely and sanely. Now, I'm really looking forward to this, as I'm sure many of you are as well. It's a bit of a struggle, a bit of a challenge for all of us. But first, let me just say a few words about Michael for those who are joining us for the first time tonight. Now, Mike is one of the foremost experts on the subject of fathering, right? He's the founder of Strong Fathers, Strong Families. He's worked with hundreds of thousands of parents and professionals in the US. He's been involved in various men's ministries across the globe. And in 2012, he was honored by President Obama as a White House Fatherhood Champion of Change. And most of all, he was a middle school principal for 20 years. 20 years, I think, right, Mike? 20 years.
No. I couldn't handle it that long, but yeah, 20
right.
years ago. 20 years ago.
20 years ago.
I would look 95 if I was a principal for 20 years.
Still, I think that's like primary school for us. So I think you survived that in my book, right? Anytime you survive that, you deserve to be honored by the president. Without further delay, I'm going to hand the stage over to Mike. Mike?
All right, thank you. Thank you, Thomas. Good evening. Good morning from Texas. Glad to be with you guys again. We wanted to talk, as we've got into the circuit breaker, I just know there's challenges at home and those kind of things. And so what we know is fathering in general is exactly what the video says, is a roller coaster, right? And there's lots of tough challenges. And about the time you think you get something covered, a kid changes on you. And they do that all the time. We're going to talk about development today. But some of you remember this situation. Have you felt like you've been on Zooms with this? Is a guy's actually talking on a BBC interview. His kids come in. And then, and I will tell you, as a dad guy, a part of me just like, what are you doing? But I'm a dad guy. So if I was on TV and my kids came into the office, it would be infuriating, except that would be my PR opportunity to pick up my children and, look at what a great dad I am. The whole time probably losing my mind. And so it's always funny to me that this, and then mom comes screaming in the background. What we've had to do over the course of really those last couple of months, is my wife is a teacher and she's teaching from home. And so we don't have any kids. We've got dogs that'll probably bark here in a little bit, and that interrupts some of our, online things. But we don't have kids running in and out. And I think about that, and I just about break out. I just about hyperventilate, because I know that many of you are trying to balance being a working dad and doing dad's work. And that's the thing that we're wanting to talk about, but there's only so much we can do about that until we kind of get some things laid out. But we know about the challenges you're having right now. So typically you get up in the mornings, you may or may not see your children, you have breakfast with them, or you take them to school, and then you go to work. And when you leave home, there's this demarcation that now you're at work. And then when you leave work, even though many of us would bring work home, there's this demarcation of I've now left work and now I'm at home and now I'm a father and I've got 2-3 hours to really focus on my fatherhood. And even that is hard, right? With a full day, and then people still pinging you and calling you or emailing you, and you trying to balance, pay attention at home, pay attention at work. Kids haven't seen you all day and now they're all over you. Well, even then, your fatherhood piece, as far as really being present with your children, 2 to 3 hours, even with bath times and dinner times and everything, 2 to 3 hours, 4 hours, all those things. Well, now it's 24 hours, right? So you've got to be a working dad, and there's children in your office all the time. And we know that's a challenge, and we wanted to talk about, okay, how do we survive that? And then the other thing is, how do we change that? Like, I believe, as challenging as the circuit breaker can be, my business has completely changed. I was headed your way in March. We were going to do a bunch of on-site conferences. I had my whole calendar, for lack of a better word, really kind of dried up as far as my travel. And now we've all kind of had to reconstitute how we're doing the work. I get to be in Singapore this evening, which is really cool. But we've had to change things, and we've had to build things. My office is now a studio, which was never going to be in the plans. And so we know that. But what I think is, I always want to be optimistic about it, is I think we have a great opportunity. And many of you will note that it's given you an opportunity to rethink about how you're working, about how you spend time with kids. Some of you have probably been through some remorse, regret, and grief about the fact that you might have not known that you were as disconnected from your kids as you were while you were working, because some of you kind of had to learn who these kids are. You're like, well, I know my kids. I'm home every day. I'm a present father. Yeah, but if you're present for, 1/6 of the day, that's a different kind of knowing your kid. Or even if you're home more, but your child is coming to school, going to school, they have their own life in that respect. And now everybody's life is together. And so one of the things I would encourage you to do as we have this discussion, and when we use the word break the cycle, a lot of times we're using it not in a negative term, but about negative behaviors, like break the cycle of domestic violence, break the cycle of alcoholism in my family, break the cycle of all that. Well, I would love for you to use the circuit breaker as an opportunity to break the cycle of whatever was not working for you in the past, right? And I'm not here to prescribe what that was. You know your family. What I know in the work that I do with fathers is that I really don't meet a dad that doesn't want to be the best dad he can. I really don't meet a father that's not wanting to do a really good job. Now, all of us sometimes lack capacity, right? A lot of us are like, man, I don't know what to do next. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to survive this. That's a matter of, excuse me for a minute. It's spring here, so there's some allergies. But I don't find that dads don't love their kids or know how to love their kids. They just want to know, how do I do that? So I want to encourage you in this conversation to kind of live in and sit in what you think maybe were challenges, maybe even some of the mistakes you've made over the past few weeks of, I just didn't realize it was this, or I didn't realize I was this, or I'm really struggling with being patient while trying to do my work, while being a working dad and a dad at work, right? And there's two different things. And let me tell you this, I have no kids at home. I'm in a great place. I live on the farm. I've got my own office. It's my wife and I, and we've learned to live with each other. We've had our own challenges, mainly in just kind of figuring out how to deal with, the time frame and even bandwidth at our house. But this is a hard time. This is a hard time, period. And again, as I'm optimistic and I'm upbeat and I'm like, what is my opportunity today? There are those times when I go, man, this is just different. It's just hard. Now I think of many of you guys that now you're throwing kids in the mix. Your kids are having challenge. It's different for them. Like, we have to understand that our kids are under a certain amount of stress as well. Some of that stress is, I'm at home, I can't go to school, I can't run around, I can't do the things I want to do, and I'm a kid, and now I've got a mom and a dad, or maybe one or the other or both, that are trying to do work while I'm trying to live in my house while these people are working around me. They have the same challenges we do. You're trying to do work with a house full of kids and family, and they're trying to be a kid in a house full of workers. And so always remember that this is something that they're trying to do as well. And so I would encourage you to really kind of think about how you're doing that. So the topic of today's talk, if you will, or discussion, is about being safe and sane. Safe is just, we're staying in, we're doing those things in the circuit breaker to stay safe. Sane is a little bit tougher, right? Because again, it's a new normal and it's not our normal, and our normal was hard enough as it was. And now we're trying to redefine this while we're under stress in all of our roles, as we talked about in our last session, as a worker, as a husband, as a father, as a dad, all those things that we're trying, as a man, just trying to figure out what is it like to be a man right now, right? And do these things. And so we're going to talk about some discipline. And I want to talk about limits and boundaries, because it's twofold. It leads us into the discussion about discipline, and it leads us out of the discussion we just had about where you're at with this new challenge. And so there's a difference between limits and boundaries. And it's a very finite thing, but I want to talk to you. So when we limit things, we're like, don't do that, don't do this, don't do that. I'm at work, and so you cannot do this, you cannot do that. that's a limit. But there's also a way to set this where you talk about maybe instead of limit, and there's still time to do limits. You can't run around the apartment screaming. That's not okay, kind of ever. I know you want to, I want to, we can't do that. But the other thing is the boundary. So if you have an office space in your house where there's can be a door shut, that's a dream situation that some of you have, some of you don't. But the other piece of that is a boundary is not, you cannot yell, you cannot do this, I cannot do this, I'm at work. But a boundary is, I'm going to be at work in this time frame. And while I'm in this time frame, certain things have to happen. And then what we've got to do with hopefully what is more of a flexible schedule, as much as it feels like we're at work all the time, we've got to set those boundaries. And so some of you may feel like this guy right here. Let me see if I can pull that up. There we go. You know, this guy, see, we want to limit the kids, and this guy set his own boundaries. And that's the difference. But this is a difference between limits and boundaries. You know, in other words, limits is you put the kid in the cage and the child can't do certain things. Whereas a boundary is, I'm going to be at work and then I'm going to be at home. And we know that's a challenge all the time, but that's where you start setting boundaries. But that also leads us to the other part about why we're talking about discipline and things. So you've got this challenge where everybody's at home and we're trying to manage a really different and difficult situation. But the discussion that we came from last time is, as a dad, how do I do my job as a dad? And we did a YouTube live this week, and I found out the sound wasn't great. I'm going to redo that so the sound's a little better, but we want to put that out because we talked about how mom and dad have a different perspective, and therefore they see the child differently, therefore they discipline differently. And so I would encourage you, we'll get that back out to you in a link. But we wanted you guys to see that as well. So when we talk about discipline, I always get the questions of when do I do this? How do I do this? Everybody wants specifics. And that's really hard because there's not one child that's alike. Like I have two sons. My brother has two daughters and a son. I know people that have 4 kids, 5 kids, and 8 kids. And what happens is you have your first child, all the challenges that come with that child, and you're navigating all the way through that. You get through the first month, and then you get through the first 6 months, and then you get through the first year, and you look back and like, that was really hard, but hey, we did it. And then you get to the second year, maybe you get to the third year, and now we're going to have another child. But we already know what to expect because we've had a child. And how many of you had that second child that was absolutely nothing like the first child? There are so many of us know that the second child's never like the first one, the third one's never like the, they're all different. And so that never changes. That's not just when they're born. This child has to have their own kind of parenting at a different time. Like my brother is 7 years younger than me. He was raised by a completely different set of parents. First off, they tested everything on me. What worked, they did with him. What didn't work, they didn't do with him, right? I was the guinea pig or the lab rat. And so he had the same mom and dad, except he had very different parents. And so what I want to talk about first is kind of this idea of discipline versus development. So some of you have kids at home that are older. Some of you have kids at home that are younger. And if I was to say, always do this, they don't apply to kids of different ages. But one of the challenges I find is we get kind of frustrated with our children, and we always almost want to think that it's their mindset. Like it gets to where we as dads and moms start thinking, this child has just gotten up this morning and planned to ruin my day. All this kid is doing is making evil plans at night. The reason they don't sleep when I tell them to sleep is because they're devising evil plans. No, they're not. I have met a kid or two that I think might be, but no, they're not. What they're doing is just trying to grow and develop and figure things out. Meanwhile, we're doing the same thing as their parent. About the time we get things figured out, they change the script, right? And so we want to talk about what that looks like. And so what we want to look at is when we look at a child's behavior, what should they do? And then the other thing is, what can they do? So you've got younger kids in the apartment right now, and they can't go out and they can't run, and they're not at school and they're not with their peers and they're not doing these things. we have to understand they're not able to completely control their impulses all the time because of what their developmental stage is. You can't make a 6-month-old go to sleep because they're not developmentally ready to go to sleep until they're ready to go to sleep. You can't make them not cry when they're hungry because that's what you do when they're hungry. You can't make a teenager have a better attitude because there's a reason they have that attitude. And we'll talk about that some in a minute. But when you're watching your child's behavior, positively, negatively, you need to ask these questions. What should they do? What do I want my child to do? What are the rules that I want them to keep? What are the rules that I don't want them to break? And then what are they capable of? What is their capacity? So there are times when I got to go out into public and do all these things that I used to do, that as I was coming home, typically late at night after doing a school program into the evening, because I traveled quite a bit, I would go to the store, the large department store, Walmart. I would go to that large store, say 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock at night. And there would almost always be a family there with a small child. And it's 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock at night. And the ones that I noticed were the ones that were absolutely losing their mind. They were screaming, they were kicking, they were crying. I just call them fluid producers, right? They've got a wet diaper, they've got a snotty nose, and they've got tears coming out of their eyes. And the parent is basically chastising this child, 3, 4, 5 years old. And it was all I could do not to chastise the parent, because we would love for this child to behave themselves in a manner that makes our life easier, except we have taken this child out of the comfort of their own home at 10 or 11 at night. They're not capable of not throwing a fit at 11 o'clock at night in a store if they need to be home and at rest. Now, I also have families that have a more flexible schedule, like that baby stays up late and sleeps late in the morning, right? That family doesn't work on the 9 to 5. That child's doing fine. I don't even notice that kid in Walmart at 11 o'clock. And so we have to look at it. The same thing goes when you get a child that becomes like 3 or 4 years old, becomes very verbal. Some of you that have kids know they're like right now being stuck in the house with them, they are way too verbal, right? But they become very verbal. They become very precocious. They speak well. They ask well. Those of you that are dads that speak to your children often, those kids become very comfortable with speaking to other adults. You can almost always tell a child that only talks to mom or has a father that doesn't talk to them much, because they really have a struggle at a certain age, 4, 5, and 6, of speaking to adults. What the research says is when a dad speaks to his kid, he does not change his tone of voice, does not change his vocabulary. Mothers, even though they don't use necessarily a baby voice, they speak to their children in a different tone than they speak to adults. Dads, you get in trouble for doing the same thing because your wife is like, why are you so harsh? I'm not harsh. I just said, pick your things up. You're so harsh. I'm like, I just said, pick up your things. I just made I didn't even yell. I didn't even growl. I just said, pick up your things. What's so harsh? No, it's like a mom. But when we as dads don't change our tone, don't change our vocabulary, then these kids get more comfortable at speaking to adults. And that's where we want to talk about development as opposed to discipline, is when your child is doing some sort of behavior. First off, they're not going out of their way most of the time to make your life miserable. They're just trying to survive. That doesn't mean that we don't have rules and we don't set parameters and we don't set expectations, but it comes to us as the parent to understand what that looks like. And so let's talk about discipline for development. A lot of times we use discipline to control the child. I've had so many people, particularly with their first child, come and say, hey, how do I make my 2-year-old do this? And I just want to give that evil laugh, like, whoa, there's no way to control a 2-year-old. And everybody says, no, we're the parents, we're supposed to control the child. No, you're never going to control the child. Because those of you that have a child that's not that controllable know what I'm talking about. What you control is the environment. What you control is the circumstances. What you control is the consequences. From the time that child is born, that child starts making decisions on their own. Different times, different levels of decision making, but you're never going to make a child do anything. And where we get really frustrated is we want this child to act a certain way. And so we want to make them. That's an individual. That's a human. And I'm not telling you not to set parameters and discipline and expectations. I'm just telling you, if you have the mindset that you're going to control a 3-year-old, you're going to lose your mind. Now, what you can do as a parent is set that schedule, set that consistency, set those parameters that right now we're going to do this, and then set that and make that comfortable for them. For you to be on the Zoom call like this, or to be on the phone with somebody and just have your child over in the corner and say, be quiet, and not give any kind of opportunities for them to be quiet, they're not going to be quiet. You don't have to occupy them with a million things. They need to learn to, manage themselves. But we get in this idea of control. Whereas when we want to talk about discipline, we're going to talk about discipline for development. We're going to get this child in a place where they behave more appropriately, and they behave more appropriately for the right reasons, as opposed to just behaving because they have the fear of retribution or discipline. And again, please understand me. I'm not talking about not disciplining your child. I'm talking about what comes on behind it that makes this more effective. And so when we have a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old or a 5-year-old, and they can't hold a cup without spilling it, you can do one of two things. You can give them a cup with a lid, and we say, well, they've got to learn to drink. That's fine. You're right. But while they're learning to drink, they're going to also know how to spill. They're going to learn not to spill by spilling. And slapping their hand, caning them, berating them is not going to keep them from spilling it if they're 3, 4, or 5. What you do is you take the time while you're there, and now we have a cup without a lid. But if you want to maintain your sanity, there are times when they have a lid. Guess what? When they're 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, whatever age it is, they're going to not need that anymore. They're going to learn. If you've got a 22-year-old with a sippy cup, that is no longer your problem. You did everything you could, right? But when we get upset about our children not being able to do things developmentally appropriate when it's not appropriate for their development, then we've got to kind of challenge how we're doing things. And so think about discipline within this realm of development. And I'll show you kind of what we're talking about. So this line right here is what we think child development is. We think our child grows and continues to develop and continues to develop. And so I'll give you an example of why that works. So we have a baby and they're not sleeping. We understand that. That's what babies do. And then all of a sudden, they start sleeping through the night. And we as parents go, we've got it. We figured it out. We're there. This child is now sleeping through the night, on to the next thing. And then at 9, 10, 11 months, all of a sudden they're not sleeping through the night anymore. And we think we have a broke child. Like, what did we do to break this child? Or why is this child deciding to no longer go to sleep? Look at the defiance of this 11-month-old. They're 11 months old. And you know what's happened? They begin to pull up. They begin to look around. And now they're trying to figure out, what can I do? Now that I can stand up in this bed, I got all kind of world open to me. The other thing is, I've been looking at the world in a different way. I've had a ton of stimulus coming at me all day. I'm not ready to sleep. My mind's not ready to sleep. I have to learn or relearn how to self-soothe. And so you look at this second step, and this is really what development is like. And I can't tell you. So this comes from Barry Brazelton, who's a U.S. pediatrician, and he calls this touch points. You notice the touch points are all tornadoes, because that's what it feels like as a parent. So you take that first step. Our child's sleeping through the night, and then all of a sudden they're not. What in the world has happened to my child? What have I done wrong as a parent? Why is this child being defiant? They're not. They're just trying to relearn how to sleep now that their world's open up to them. Okay, so now they learn to go back to sleep, and we've got that. Now they're walking, and we've got them to not look into cabinets and not go out on the balcony or whatever we've done. So now we're developing again, and we have this growth, and I'm going to go this way. And we have this growth, and we're like, okay, we're on track. This kid's doing great. And then all of a sudden we have this tornado again. We have this disturbance. The thing is, that's what true child development looks like, is they grow, and then there's this disturbance because they've got to reorganize everything in their body and in their mind. And when we first started looking at this with Dr. Brazelton, this was really about young children. But we said we need one of these for teenagers as well, because it's absolutely the development of all of us, but more so particularly our children. Because see, we want that straight line. The reason you get frustrated as a dad is because they ought to just keep growing. Why don't they just keep growing? Why are we stepping back? Why? I thought we had this covered. Why are you not doing what I told you to do? Kid doesn't even know sometimes. So you guys have trained your potty trained your children. They now go to the bathroom. They now know how to take care of themselves. They've got good hygiene. They follow the rules. And then all of a sudden, like I had two sons, you get a 9 and a 10-year-old boy, and all of a sudden we're back to raising barbarians, right? It's like, did you forget how to use toilet paper? Did you forget how to wash your hands? And we're like, this child is being defiant. This child is being a heathen. No, this child is 9 years old and now 10 years old, and their mind is on something different. They're very distractible. They're coming into their own in a different way. And you still have to say, hey, dude, take care of your business, clean yourself appropriately, follow the hygiene rules. That's what we still do, but we don't have to think the child is broken, the child is defiant, or the child will always be a barbarian. I think I may have said this last time, or I know I said it with our group. My dad watched me eat spaghetti when I was 10 years old. And my dad told me at the table, and I don't know if this is good or bad, I just know this is what happened to me. My dad said, nobody's ever going to marry you if you eat like that. And he was right. I was an absolute barbarian. And what I learned was, first thing I learned was when you go on a date, don't order spaghetti. Because I still, at 16, 18, 20, I still was eating like a barbarian. But what I figured out was I'd like to be married. These girls seem pretty interesting to me. I'd like to have one of my own if I could. If I could get one that I could follow or that would follow me, I would really like to have that. Well, guess what I had to do? I had to learn how to eat spaghetti. What I had to learn first is don't eat spaghetti in front of a girl. But that was part of my development. But what my dad was looking at his oldest son going, what am I raising? Well, at the time, he was raising a barbarian, a 10-year-old barbarian. And we have to understand that development comes in this line, but in these spurts. So teenagers, when we talk about how tough teenagers can be, the main issue with teenagers is not just that now they found some independence, but for their whole life, if we've done our job as parents, you as a mom or you as a dad are an absolute superhero. You know everything. You can do you can open jars. You can reach in the cabinet. You know everything about the world and politics and finance. And then sooner or later, they become more self-aware. They begin to get knowledge on their own. And then they look around, they're like, my dad's not a superhero. My dad's an idiot. That's not how you do life. I've become a very smart person because I'm a teenager. I now have all the answers because I have the internet. And my dad is not very smart. And that really hurts our feelings. It really causes conflict. And I will tell you, because I survived it as well, if you'll just wait and let them get a little life under them, 18, 19, 20, somewhere in there, they start coming back going, oh, so this is not easy out here. Yeah, what do you know? Going to work every day is not easy. Trying to figure out how to pay your bills is not easy. And then probably the greatest blessing I've had from both my sons is that at one time or another, they've texted me or emailed me or even called me and said, thank you so much for doing this way, because I have friends, colleagues, or coworkers that don't have a clue. And so they will catch it, but it takes them a while. And that's a part of that. Let me go back to this for a minute. I want to talk about this. So see these tornadoes? We can actually predict these, right? Even more, like I live in Texas. We have tornadoes during this time of year, and we're trying to predict those. But the tornadoes of child development, we can tell you at 10 or 11 months, the child's going to stop sleeping through the night again. Why? Because they're pulling up, they're walking. We can tell you that a teenager is going to start being these ways because of how they're learning this. We can tell you that a 2-year-old is going to find the power of no and then not become a horrible child, but now they're trying to figure out, how do I exercise my power and my no, and how does that work with all these other people in the house? All of these are predictable. They're not specifically to the day, but we can say if your child is 10, 11, 12, 18, 21, whatever it is, this is what they're going through and this is what it is. And so that helps you kind of inform it. And that goes back to the question now of who is the parent? When we talk about discipline, we always talk about control. And discipline is not so much about controlling the child, but controlling the environment around the child. And then that brings about control for the child, both because they've got to learn to control themselves, right? What we want to do is we kind of want to bend their will to ours. If you do that, then you're going to get one of two things. You're going to get a compliant child, which sounds great, but when they get out into the real world, they're not going to know how to navigate their own feelings and their own challenges. Also, if you've got a kid that's pushing really hard against all those norms and parameters, you have to tighten things down because they have to understand, yes, you have all this power, but having this power to make these decisions comes with responsibility and consequences. So I'll give you a real quick example. When my oldest son was 5th or 6th grade, he was being bullied by a child at school. And having been, like Thomas said, I was a middle school principal for a while. And when I was in middle school, if somebody picked on you, you picked back, or you sooner or later, you had enough and you said, meet me after school, meet me in the parking lot. Or you just started throwing fists right there in the hallway. My middle school years were just fights because everybody was trying to figure that out. Well, that sounds like a great idea. That seems like old school. All the dads would come to me and go, that's how we did it. That's not appropriate either. But what's also not appropriate is for you to be a victim to somebody and let that just go on. So as my child was being bullied, I said, go tell a teacher, go tell a principal. Well, they're not doing anything. Continue to tell the teacher or principal. After a while, nothing was happening. I said, then punch him in the nose. And everybody's like, I can't believe you said that. I said, no, here's the issue though. If you do that to get this child to stop bullying you, there are consequences that come with that. Like I have people in a grocery store, I have people in traffic that quite honestly just want to punch in the nose. They're infringing on my rights to be in this line or to be in this lane or whatever. And there's a part of me that just wants to punch them in the nose. I'm not a violent person. Okay, in my mind, sometimes I'm a violent person, but I want to punch them in the nose. Well, why don't I punch them in the nose? Because that's how I feel. Well, because there's consequences to that. And so what happened was when I gave my child the option to control their own situation and environment, they never punched anybody in the nose. But because they had that power, they began to not be bullied because there was just a difference in their stance because now I'm in control of how I'm going to be treated. I have some options. But I told them, if you get in a fight, which is not my first, that's not my wish, I will not defend you, and you will face whatever consequences come. If it's suspension, if it's a paddling, whatever it is, you're going to face it. And that gave the power back to the kids, both to handle their business and at the same time that they're responsible for the consequences of their business. So when I say who is the parent, you've got two things. When we use that, usually we see a parent that's being too permissive and the child's just running all over it. And so the child's just running all over the parent. And we're like, see, that person's not being the parent. And that's very true. The child is controlling and running everything, which is not good for the home. And it's really not good for that child. I feel sorry for the parents that have kind of an out of control child, but I feel more sorry for the child because they're not going to learn until they get out of the house how hard that is, that nobody's going to put up with that kind of business. That you're not going to have friends, you're not going to keep a job, you're not going to have relationships if you think the world revolves around you. If you don't understand, you're part of this bigger picture. And that's what we do when we discipline our child, right? But also when I say who is the parent, when we are disciplining heavy, when we're caning our children for all the infractions that they have, and we're not managing the child's behavior around what we manage, then we're not the parent either. When all you're doing is yelling at your child, spanking your child, caning your child to get them to comply, you're not the parent either. Actually, that child's in control as much as the child that's been left to control the house. Because what a child will learn is two things. Number one, if I do something, I might push dad or mom's buttons. And when I push those buttons, it's no longer my fault. I'm no longer responsible for my behavior because my parents are losing their minds, right? My parents are now angry. My parents have done this. And now I'm not responsible for my behavior. Whereas if you calmly and really methodically, intentionally, I think would be a better word. If you intentionally set parameters, and when they cross those boundaries or parameters, then you discipline them, not out of anger, but out of control, then all of a sudden this child's like, wait, I don't get to decide how my parents react. One of my favorite things to do is to flip the script on them. And when they think I'm going to push dad's buttons, dad's going to get angry. And then I don't have to deal with what I did, because now I can just go, look, dad's crazy. None of this matters because dad's just an angry man. What scared my children the most was silence or calm, because they would do something and I would say, what did I tell you to do? And they would try from very small to even particularly teenagers. They would try every way in the book that they could try to push my buttons. Well, I didn't do it, or it's not my fault, or you told me this. And I'm like, what did I say? Well, what did I say? I'm not asking you about all the circumstances around it. I want you to repeat to me what the directive was. What did I tell you to do? You told me to clean my room. You told me to mow the yard. You told me to get ready and go to bed. You told me to get a bath. Whatever it was that they didn't do. And I said, okay, have you done that? No, I didn't ask you why. I said, did you do it? No. Okay. What did I say would happen if you didn't do what I told you to do? I would get a spanking. I would lose screen time. I would not get to go to my friends, whatever it was. Okay. That's what I said I was going to do. Did you do what I told you? No. So what did I say would happen? Okay. And then you do that. And now what they've got to do is like, wait, so it's really, I can't control my dad or my mom. So how am I going to stay in control? Only thing they're going to learn to control is what their choices are about doing that. Some of you have kids that when you say, if you do that, I will spank you. If you do that, you will get a caning. And you watch a kid look you in the eye. They'll look you right in the eye and go, touch. Why? Because they're like, bring it. See what you got. I'll take the spanking because I want to be in control. I think it's still fine to spank them, but I also think it's fine to say, you know what? I'm going to change it because I'm not going to have you decide how this thing goes. So that's when I go back to being a parent. It isn't all this permissiveness. It is being the authority, but not being authoritarian. So you understand the difference of, I'm the one in control of this environment. And if you're not complying within this environment, we're going to change your environment, whatever that may be. But we're not going to control everything. We're not going to kind of control what choices they make. And we really try that. And we will even try to shame our kid. Right? It's like, you're a bad kid, or you're defiant, or you're, a hooligan or a ruffian or a heathen or whatever. And a lot of times when it's developmental, it's like, I spilled my milk. I'm 5. Why are you losing your mind? Because I didn't know. Right? So kids that don't sleep well. Kids that try to do their homework, right? Some of you have been through this recently. Sit down and do your work in the house, not in school, with everybody else working, and they're not doing it. They're very distracted. And what we want to do is we say, well, I'm going to spank you until you decide to pay attention. What I want you to think about is, how are you doing? Right? I still think you set expectations for this kid to do their work. I still think you improve the environment to the best they can. And if they don't finish their work, then yeah, there may be some consequences to it. But what we have to understand is, this child's not going out of their way to be distracted. They're 10. And many of you would argue with me and say, yeah, but they've got to learn. They will learn, but they're not going to learn it all when they're 10. You didn't become the focused professional that you are at the age of 10. Yes, your parents sat you down and they told you to focus. And you remember, particularly those of us that are boys, how hard that was, right? Some of you have been very hard on yourselves because you're like, I didn't do that. You were 10, right? Well, when I was 18, you were 18. Give your kids some slack and give yourself some slack, and understand it's all part of the development. So let's talk about when you go to the nth degree. I had a great principal that I worked with one time, and he said, when you follow things to the bitter end, where do you end up? And I said, oh, the bitter end. Right? There are times when we get in a battle with our kids and we follow it through and we win, but children didn't learn. We get very frustrated, and we don't have anything to show for it. We just have an upset household. And sometimes kid just needs to be upset. Sometimes a kid gets to cry and get over it. And as my mama used to say, you can get glad in the same pants you got mad in. In other words, I'm not worried about you being upset or mad, but this is how you're going to do things in this household. So as you go and think about this child needs to be spanked, or this child needs to be restricted, or this child needs to be that, I think those are all valid decisions. The question is, what are you going to win? Are you going to win the battle, or do you want to win the war? Do you want to have a compliant 10-year-old that never gives you any hassle because of their development? Or do you want a child that becomes an adult that can watch their own, that can handle all the challenges that come at them? Impulse control, aggression management, how they treat other people, how they see themselves, right? This is not a sprint, it's a marathon. We've all heard that. But also this is a full-on campaign. And if we're worried about winning every battle, sometimes you got to retreat, and sometimes you just have to hold your ground. See, so many times we want to progress against a child. We're like, they're not doing what I want them to do, and so I'm going to make them do what I want. What are you trying to get to? There is a time when you assert your power. There is a time when everybody knows in this house who's in charge, but the way you do that is more so from calm and setting parameters and consequences, as opposed to reacting to all the misbehavior the kid has. First thing you do when you see some kind of behavior you don't like, is that what they should do, or is that what they can do? Where are they developmentally that this is okay or not? If you've got a kid that can't sit still for more than 30 minutes because they're 8, that's every 8-year-old. So think about, why do I want them to sit still for more than 30 minutes? And if I do want them to sit still for more than 30 minutes, what am I going to provide for them to help them do that because they're 8? Those of you that have 14-year-olds, it's not hard to get a 14-year-old to sit still. It's hard to get a child to move at the age of 14, right? They just become a lump. And then we're like, well, I want this child to move, right? And then think about that in the life of a child. When I was 8, you told me to quit moving around all the time. Now I'm 14, you tell me to move all the time. What do you want, old man? What they want is try to figure out how they're developing and how they're doing that. So when we talk about winning, what are you trying to do? What a 14-year-old needs to learn is you need to know that the whole world does not revolve around you, and there are other people in this house, there are other people on the planet that you need to pay attention to. Put down your phone and pay attention to what your parents are saying to you. Put down your phone and be appropriate around adults. You know, all these different things. That's not anything wrong that you need to do, but it goes back to, you know, what are you winning? So let's go back to that. When you look at your child's behavior, is it defiance or is it development? And there's 2 different ways. So people ask me about corporal punishment. I'm fine with corporal punishment, but it's for defiance, not for whatever developmental stage they're at where they made a mistake. If a 4-year-old, a 5-year-old, maybe even a 6-year-old spills their milk twice a week, it is infuriating. Why can't you learn to do that? Well, they're 6. They're still trying to figure out how to walk and talk and chew gum and all of that at the same time, right? And so, yes, you have to say, hey, sit down. Don't be so rambunctious, or you're going to spill your milk. But when they spill their milk, we want to punish them because they went out of their way to spill the milk. No, they didn't. They're having trouble controlling themselves from being rambunctious. So address that. What did I tell you to do? I told you to sit still. It's really hard to sit still. Now you get it. You got to know that about a 6-year-old or an 8-year-old or whatever. But how you address that is differently. You cannot appropriately and effectively punish development, right? You can punish it, but it's not doing you any good because the child's like, I don't even know what I'm trying to do here. I'm trying to control it. And most of us, again, we've got a lot of boys on here. We've got a lot of men on here. All of you remember when you were told to sit still, when you were not at a place where it was easy to sit still, and how maddening that was, right? So think about when, put yourself back in that situation and like, what did I need? I needed somebody to tell me, okay, sit still for the next 10, 15 minutes, and then we're going to do this. Or I need you to sit still because of this. And even though it's a challenge, now I have a better understanding. So some of my own personal work that I've gone back and thought I was this or that. And I'm like, no, I look back at it and go, my dad is passed now. But I've had to go back and think, my dad treated me this way. I was just a kid. And that doesn't mean that I got to do whatever I wanted. But my dad, particularly with me as the first child, didn't understand that that was not developmentally appropriate. My brother got away with what I thought was murder. But you know what my dad learned? It's like, no, at this age, they can only do so much. And I learned that through the hard way, being the lab rat. But my dad came around to being a more patient person because he didn't think we were all out to get him. He thought, well, that's what kids do, and they'll survive and they'll bounce back. And that's the other thing I want you to know is you're doing a good job. Even on your bad days, when you may be disciplined the wrong way, your kids are going to be fine. On those days when you maybe should have disciplined and you didn't do it appropriately, your kids are not just going to go off the rails. This is a developmental process of raising a child, not to be a good 4-year-old, not to be a good 10-year-old, but to be a child that can handle it, right? And grows. And then just like right now, I'm shocked almost every day when my 24 and 28-year-old do some really great adult things. I'm like, wow, I didn't see that coming. No, I didn't see it when they were coming. I didn't see it coming when they were 10, right? And so think about this. Are you controlling the world around your child? Are you trying to control your child? Or as the parent, are you the one in control? And what you use as control is you control the environment. What is going on right now in your household that is not working? And then what can you do to change that? So if your child is really grumpy or angry or lashing out later at night, maybe they need to get in bed earlier. Maybe they need to have a more consistent schedule. Or maybe your schedule's too rigid. Maybe your kids need to loosen up a little bit because they're just always under this pressure to be quiet and then go to this thing and then go to this thing. Maybe they need some playtime. I can't tell you what to do for your own children, but what I can tell you is instead of trying to control the child, control the environment. Now, again, I get the question about what kind of punishment. I'm not down with punishment. I'm down with discipline, and that may include caning, that may include restriction, that may include like when my boys were in their high school years and they thought they were something. Me as their father got physically aggressively in their face because they thought they were some kind of man, and what they weren't was the man of my house. And they weren't doing, they weren't being violent. They weren't doing that, but they just wanted to assert their physical self. And what they learned real quick is that I'm way more of a physical self than you are. I didn't have to put my hands on them. Didn't have to do anything, but what I had to do was I'm in control of my situation in this house. And what you're not going to do is speak to your mother that way. You're not going to speak to me that way, or you're not going to act that way. I don't care how big you think you are. And what they learned real quick was dad will get serious real quick. So I'm not opposed to restrictions. I'm not opposed to corporal punishment. I'm not opposed to that. What I am in support of is you being the one in control of that. And the best way you can control that and decide the best punishment is 2 things. Know where your child is developmentally and decide, can they do it? Should they do it? There are lots of things that even young children are capable of doing. And if they don't do it, there should be some sort of punishment, again, discipline. There should be some kind of consequence to that. No, if you don't pick your things up, then you don't get to go do this. No, if I know that I clearly and appropriately told you to do this or not do this, and you walked right through that, that's defiance. That's where I typically use any kind of corporal punishment. I'm not going to spank a kid for spilling their milk. I am going to spank a kid for tossing a glass across the room because that's not appropriate in my household. And so there's that spectrum of how you're going to do those things. So again, I know some of you really wanted the to do, but this is really not theory. This is how to get along every day. This is how to say, okay, my child's doing this. What can they do? What should they do? Now, how do I set the parameters? And then how do I set the consequences? And that's a learning process every day. And about the time you get it down, they're going to do a pivot on you and they're going to change. So hopefully this makes sense to you. Hopefully you understand that as your child's growing, it's a developmental piece. There are some children that really are making decisions to just make your life miserable. They're really out there. So I don't want to not honor the fact that some of you are dealing with some really challenging children. But most of the challenges that our kids come with, they're not trying to make our life horrible. They're just trying to survive themselves. And they're having as much trouble now as we are. And so I want you to remember that. Thomas, I'm going to open it up to questions. Thomas, I'll let you pick the questions because it looks like there's a handful of them.
Sure. But just 2 things. First, the next Dads Matter is going to focus on how dads matter in their child's education. Adrian, do you think you could pull up the slide? Yeah, and maybe Mike, you could, if you could just say a few words about that.
Yeah, the YouTube we did this week was about the different perspectives on moms and dads. And so most of my work with fathers is really focused around this piece of what dads do in education. What got me into this work was, as a principal, I knew we needed to make changes for kids. And so I thought we need to get more dads involved. And then what we were hearing at first was, well, dads aren't around and we have this fatherless problem. And that is a problem. But what we're not talking about, that I try to talk about, is what dads do when they're involved with their kids. These guys that are here tonight, they're involved fathers, but we want you to understand you have a very specific role to play in the lives of your kids, and it makes a huge impact on their academics, how they read, how they write, how they do math, how they do science. I'm not saying like the kid just is a decent child in school. I'm saying that what you do at all stages of their development as a father has a huge impact on academic outcomes of all sorts. So we'll do a little bit more about research on that, because once you know that you have an impact, then you can decide how you're going to have that impact. So we'll have some how to, but a lot of it will be based on kind of helping you defend yourself as a dad that's trying to be involved with your wife, with the mother of your kids, and then also in the schools. Because a lot of times the schools just lean on us for what we talked about today, discipline. Whereas a lot of times it can also be, wait, what you do has an impact on how the child behaves in school, how the child performs in school academically. And I get to be an expert in this because there's not enough people talking about it, right? But this is what we talk about all the time. We'll also send out a link. I did a TED Talk several years ago, and that'll be a good precursor to some of the research that we'll bring up. Actually, that's the pictures you guys have right now is from my TED Talk. That first one looked like I was saying, here's how to choke a child. This is, now how to help a child in school. So yeah, we have a lot of information on that. We'd love for you guys to join us.
So the first question that came up as well was, is there a difference in disciplining a daughter versus disciplining a son?
And that's a good one. Here's the thing. What a dad does for a daughter is amazing. The fact that he's preparing her just like he's preparing a son. Where you get into the challenges is that we think we have to have a different hand. We have a different relationship with daughters than we do with sons. We have a different feel about it, right? We want our sons to be all these things and go out into the world. Well, we got to prepare our daughters for the same thing. And what I see in strong fathers that do this is you still have to set the same parameters. You still have to set the same thing. Here's what your daughter will learn. If when you punish them or when you divvy out consequences, if they can play to your heart, they're going to have less consequences. And so we talk about the baby girl wrapping you around their finger. I have 2 sons. I'm not strong enough to have a daughter, right? Because all my money would leave my pocket. I would never tell her to do anything. But our job as a father is to set those same parameters for our daughters, right? Now we need to treat her like a princess. She needs to be treated like a princess. I have a really good friend that has a daughter, and he treated her like a princess, but he still had standards for her. And he taught her how to, he taught her how to hit the baseball, and he taught her or the softball, and he taught her how to handle herself around boys and girls. He taught her how to not put up with these things. And I called her Unstoppable Brooke when she was a very young child. And one of the greatest stories about what he did was she was a rambunctious young child, right? So when they would go to the store and mom would need to buy things, he would take his daughter and he would go to pick out, say, 4 to 6 dresses off the rack because she's 5, 6, 7 years old. And he would go, let's go try these on. And she would go try them on. She'd put the dress on. She'd come out, twirl around. He goes, you look beautiful. I like how that bow looks. And go back in, try 4 or 5 dresses on. And I said, how many dresses did you have to buy? He said, most of the time she was just sick of trying on dresses. But he got the opportunity to tell his daughter, you're beautiful 5 to 6 times, but at a time. What that does is that daughter needs to know that she is delighted in. So a girl's question is, do you delight in me? And so our first job is to say she's the princess, to say she's beautiful, and to say that she is our delight. That's not how boys feel. Boys feel like, do I have what it takes? So when the boy's jumping off the tree, running into the tree, jumping on benches, swinging from the swing set, they want to know, do I have what it takes to be out there? Well, that's a girl's question too, but her first question is, am I delightful? So when we talk about disciplining a daughter, discipline is the same. We still expect her to react the same way, to do the hard work, because 2 things. She can achieve great things. The other thing is we want her to be able to achieve that without having to depend on anybody, right? And our best wives are the ones that gain that independence as a person from their fathers or other people. Like there were times when I didn't really want my wife to be that tough or independent. So the girl's question about the girl is she still gets the same parameters, but she does get treated differently in how you support her. And I think that's been the challenge is we feel like we're supposed to discipline differently. I don't think so. I think she needs to understand what the consequences are. But her first goal is to please you as a dad, but for a different reason. She wants to know from you if she's delightful. Boys want to know, do I have what it takes? A girl wants to know does she have what it takes, but it's way down the list. Boys, I don't know if we ever want to be delightful, but we do want to know that we love it when our moms tell us we're handsome, right? And that's a lot of times what we get from our moms.
There's a question about, what are your views regarding teenagers thinking that curse words are absolutely normal because that's what they pick up from the media and their friends?
Right. This is that old adage of, I don't care what your friends are doing. Or if your friends all jumped off a bridge, would you do it? And the teenage answer is, yeah, probably. What rules that you set in your house are the rules that you set in your house. My sons now are struggling as they come back because they almost want to use that language in our house. And part of it, we've just decided as adults that sooner or later, we do say something. But when they were younger, you don't use that language in the house. They never heard their parents use it. We tried to limit how they saw it in the media because in our household, we're not going to talk that way. Even now as adults, I come back and tell them, because what they're trying to do now as young men is kind of exert themselves as I'm an adult and I'm making my own decisions. When they come back home, when we go back home, we always kind of feel that childlikeness, right? Like these people don't believe I'm an adult. Yeah, I know you're an adult. You're paying your own bills. I'm glad you're an adult. But whatever you think is appropriate in your household, set those parameters and stick with it. Understand that they're going to push limits. So every time they say a bad word, I don't know that you have to I'm going to throw you out. At the same time, I think you address it. And I think you tell them, if you continue to talk that way, we're going to limit who you hang out with because that's where you're getting it or what you're watching and ingesting. And if you can't stay in my house without using that kind of language, again, I can't control what you do, but I can control what you see and hear while you're in my house. And so if you have a parameter where I don't want you to speak that way, then set that. And I think that's good in two ways is they need to see you in public setting, you in your professional setting, you and your responsibilities as an adult, like whether it's in church or whether it's around other adults, do they see you using that language? And they may need to see that when I'm with my friends, I have some language differences. When I'm with my buddies or my boys, I have some different language. But when I'm in my work or when I'm around different people, when I'm even around my wife, I don't speak the same as I do now with my sons who are adults because it's the way I communicate. But that's another thing they need to learn. In this house, these are the things we will do or not do. And I think that's always appropriate. I would never tell you that. Now, developmentally, they're going to want to try it. Developmentally, they think that's what makes you an adult is to know and use bad words. No, that's what the media says as an adult. When I'm in a meeting with somebody and they can't not use those words, I'm not impressed by that. I think you should have a better vocabulary. And I think I know how to use all those words. I use them in strings. I know how to use them quite appropriately, but you won't see me use them most of the time. So I think that's appropriate to tell your kids, no, we're not going to talk that way in our home.
Okay, so two questions in one. One is, how do you define spanking? Because some people have children who are just like 8 months old or something. And the other thing, of course, is also how do you deal with defiance in a teenager when the husbands and wives actually have different perceptions about, what appropriate behavior is?
Right. And that goes back to this whole discussion because the challenge is, what does the child need to learn right now in that moment, as opposed to what their motivation is? We as dads want to be respected in our house, and we do want to have some control. And I think you should. But what we feel like is this child is trying to take control from me. The mother, a lot of times, will say, well, they're just doing this or they're just being this. And that's where we get in this conflict. We think mom's being soft and dad's being harsh, but we have two different perspectives. The mother, a lot of times, will see this child as they're just kind of trying to find their way. And so, we don't need to be so harsh. And at the same time, sometimes dad is like, I will not be, that child will not get away with this. That child will not speak this way. And there's really, those perspectives are fine, but neither one of them are completely correct for the kid. So mom wanting to make sure that we're not breaking the spirit, as we say, we don't want to make this child, like break their spirit. And at the same time, there's too much spirit going on over here. So where the dad feels like he's being disrespected or out of control, you've got to come in a little bit and know that this child is just kind of testing boundaries and limits. And what mom needs to know is, no matter what their heart is or how they really are, they're no longer an 8-year-old, they're no longer a 10-year-old. They are a child that's making some very serious decisions. And so we need to have some consequences in that. And so what we want to make sure is, out here on the outside, mom and dad see it correctly from their perspective. But both perspectives are very important in figuring out where the child needs to be on the spectrum, right? Dad is out in the outside world, even if mom's working in the outside world, to that child and to her, she's the mother of this child, right? But the dad is the one saying, you can't act that way and make it out here. You can't have a job, you can't have friends, you can't stay out of jail. You're not going to be able to live that way as an adult. So that's where the mom says, well, they're not an adult. And dad says, yeah, but they've got to learn to be. Well, now we're let's say 14. We're further away or closer to being an adult. And we need to decide as parents, where is this child really in their development? And then what would be appropriate for that level of development? So here in the States, when you turn 16, you can get your driver's license. So that's one, that's a discussion that parents have. And then mother says, well, they can only drive to school and they can only drive 20 miles an hour. And the dad says, I don't want my kid driving 20 miles an hour. They're going to get run over. They've got to learn how to drive in the lane of traffic. But they're only going to do that between here and school for a while. And then as my kids got older, I said, you can go into the city, but you can only go into these parts of the city. And so you begin to dole that out. Well, the same thing happens with a teenager, like on that defiance. It is defiance. When a kid knows what to do and they do something against that, that is defiance. But it's not always this evil intent, but what they're doing is testing their boundaries. Just like a kid that begins to walk, they're like, can I walk over here? Am I going to get in trouble? Can I touch this cabinet? What can I do? So again, I still think you address it, and I still think you have levels of consequences of, you want to test the limit? Fine, I'll show you what happens when you test that limit. If we've set really strong limits and boundaries and you want to bust through those, well, we're going to take care of that in a different way. And so severity, that's the challenge with corporal punishment. It's kind of the end result. And there's a lot of tools you could use before that. And again, I'm not opposed to using it, but if that's the first tool you pull out, what else are you going to do? It's corporal punishment, then it's murder. I mean, you don't have anything else. And so that I'm still fine with it on young adults, teenagers, right? That could be an appropriate intervention. But it goes back to, is it defiance? Yeah, probably. They're going against what parameters you set. Part of it is they're testing boundaries. That's part of their development. So just know that they don't have evil intent. And at the same time, maybe what you do is control that so that they don't go out and just do crazy things when they're out with their friends, because you control what friends are around. You control how long they're with their friends. You control what time of day. Our mom used to tell us there's nothing good that happens after midnight. When I was in high school, I thought all the cool things happened after midnight. And what she meant was that's a bad time to make good decisions. And so they controlled when I was making those decisions. And I think that may be the parameter that you're looking for, is how do we control this kid? You don't, but you can control when and where they make their decisions. And then you have kids that are like, I'll do whatever I want. Fine, you'll do it on your own money and in your own place. If you decide you're not going to live under the rules in this house, then you're not in this house anymore. And I don't think that's a bad discussion to have. They just need to know you don't have a dime. You don't have a job. You don't have money. You don't have anything. So for you to get the benefits you have here of the home, there are rules to live by. Moms have those rules. Dads have those rules. I don't get to live however I want and come back to my wife at home. And so our kids need to learn that as well. And the kids that don't learn that really have bad relationships later. Now let's go to the 8-month-old. A kid touching a hot stove, running into the street, need to be spanked. But again, it's not out of anger, and it's also not that severe. Do what it takes to get their attention. What you're not going to do is get them to stop running into the street as far as the desire. That's what sometimes we want to change their desire. You can't change their desire for anything. If you put a chocolate bar or marshmallows or whatever in front of a child and say, don't touch them, good luck with that. What you do is you don't put the chocolate bar in front of the child if you don't want them to eat it. If you don't want them to eat the whole thing, then you break it into pieces and feed it to them a little bit at a time. Why? Because they don't have that locus of control. The main thing when I talk about corporal punishment, 8-month-old, no, they're just learning and going. Let them go. You can change the parameters, and then if they go past whatever, they crawl into the different room. Take them out of that room again. If they keep doing that, shut the door. If you want to give them a spat, that's fine. But what are you really trying to teach them? What we think is we want to control this kid. This kid, every day is different right now. At 8-month-old, they don't understand that. When we take my oldest son, we take him to church, and he would begin to act up in church. And my wife said, take him outside and spank him because he's misbehaving. I would take him outside, and by the time I got to the back of the church, I could tell on his face, he had no clue why we were back there. She goes, did you spank him? I said, no, I didn't. And I'm really not that soft, but I'm like, no, I didn't. She goes, why? Well, because he didn't have a clue why he was getting spanked. He just knew that so I removed him from that. Now, what we didn't do when we went out of the back of the church was we didn't get to go do playtime. You know what you're going to do? You're going to sit still here and here where we are, because you wouldn't sit still where we were. But what you're not going to do is, I'm not going to spank you when you don't know why, because he was like, maybe a year old. But you're going to be removed from the situation where you're not acting appropriately, and we're going to work on how you're supposed to act. And I think that's what you do with an 8-month-old, is you continually show them the way to do it, right? And so a lot of times, again, if all you ever use, particularly like an 8-month-old, spanking is not appropriate because they don't know. They're not going to learn from it. What you're trying to do is get them to learn, right? You can do as much when a child goes to, say, touch the stove. With I didn't spank as much as I went, I just have this buzzer in me as a dad. And what they learned was, if I give you a couple of buzzers and you're not listening, I'm going to remove you from the situation. You're going to your room, you're going to bed, you're going to the playpen, you're getting away from this, I'm going to do this, because you're not learning not to touch this. And I don't mind spatting the hand, but you can just spat the hand so much before they learn, oh, this is not appropriate. Right? And if they spat my hand for everything, I just do things until they spat my hand, then I go on. So now the child's not making any decisions on their own. And I think we have to understand, with an 8-month-old, they are learning to make decisions. They're like, oh, when I do this, these things happen. I don't want to do that anymore. And that is a spanking or a spat, but there's so many other tools to use, not because I'm against the other, but because it's like, what's the most effective for this kid to learn in their development? So any other questions? Looks like we've got a few.
Yeah, there's a great question about how do you determine what an age-appropriate consequence is? This is from someone who has a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old. And then how do you deal with tantrums, essentially?
Okay, I was waiting for tantrums to come up. So here's my deal on tantrums. And this works for 8 months old and 18-year-olds, right? And it took me a while to figure out that this was effective. When a child throws a tantrum, what they're trying to do is get what they want and get attention. We really struggle with kids that want negative attention, because me as a child, I didn't want any negative attention. I didn't want my dad to stare at me wrong. I didn't want my dad to raise his voice. I sure didn't want a spanking. And so I would do whatever it took. Sometimes that was inappropriate too, but I would do whatever it took to not get that negative attention, right? And so kids do that. So I had a young man that had a 2-year-old. That's when tantrums really begin to kick in, because they're exerting their power, right? They're like, I have the power of no, I need to learn how to use it. And boy, they go to work, don't they? And he said, my child's throwing a tantrum. I said, when they throw a tantrum, don't feed the fit. So hear me. If they're throwing a fit, don't feed it. Don't try to reason with a 2-year-old. Don't try to tell him, hey, this is why we don't throw a fit. All they know right now is I'm losing my mind. I'm not getting what I want. And the only thing I can think about what I want to do right now is throw myself down and scream. Well, here's one of two things. Well, three things really. If you try to reason with them, that's not helping them. They're just going to throw a bigger fit. They're not listening. They're not going to learn. They're 2. The other thing is, if you pick them up and cause more chaos through a spanking or whatever, they're still just trying to figure out how to get what they want. So what I say is, don't feed the fit. Don't reason with them. Don't even punish them. Control it. So when they throw themselves down, step over them and go over. So if let's say they want a snack, or they want a toy, or they want to watch whatever video, and then they throw themselves down, what we want to do is, and a lot of times this is what we do as parents, we throw our own tantrum. You're not going to throw a tantrum, I'm going to throw a tantrum. And all you're showing them is like, if you can throw the bigger tantrum, you win, right? But if you stay in control, and we finally did this. We're like, when you're done with that tantrum, let me know what you want. Or, I want a video, or I want, You're not getting it, but you're not getting anything until you quit throwing this fit. And I told this guy that, I said, don't feed the fit. Step over them, go on about your business. If they need something or want something, have them come calmly ask. Just because they throw themselves down and scream, and just because it's actually no fun to be around that child at the moment, that's where I'm talking about you being in control. If they know they can make your life miserable, guess what they're going to do the next time? They're going to make your life miserable until they get what they want. If they learn that no matter how big a fit I throw, that my dad is not paying attention to that, and the only way I'm going to get what I want is to try to be a rational human being, then that's what I'm going to learn to do. But if I learn that if I throw a fit, he throws a fit, and whoever throws the biggest fit wins, that's where fits get out of control between adults and children. So I told this guy, I said, step over him. Tell him when you're ready to talk, I'm here for you, but we're not going to talk while you're throwing a fit. All right, even a 2-year-old can learn that. And he said, what about if they do it in public? What about if they do it like in a store? I said, step over him. He goes, in a store? Because we have this whole fear, I think all of us do, that somebody's going to take our child. If we don't have our eyes on them all the time, then somebody's going to take the child. And I said, nobody's taking that child. That child is throwing a fit. The worst person in the world, it's like looking for a child in a horrible way. He's going to go, I need a child. And he's like, not that one. That one's crazy. I don't want that one. And so the tantrums that they throw when they're 2, you do the same thing with teenagers or preteens. And it's don't feed the fit, but what we did at home when it worked was we called it bump and run. Like I told you earlier. Like what a teenager wants to do is to get out from underneath that responsibility of doing whatever you've told them to do. They want to try to control that situation, even if they don't know why. Part of their development is they want to be in control, and they're not in control at home. So they're going to try to find ways to control their parents, either through manipulation or through pushing your buttons different ways, right? And so both my kids would do this. One was better at it than the other, is that if they could get us to be angry and react in an angry way, then they were no longer responsible for their bad behavior. They're like, see, my parents are crazy. I don't have to do this because my parents are crazy. But on a bump and run, it's just like, instead of stepping over the teenager that's throwing a fit, they would say, I want to go to my friends, or all my friends are going, or how come I can't do this? Or they say those words on TV. Why can't I say them at home? I told you we're not using those words at this house. I told you you're not going to your friend's house. Instead of saying, you're always arguing with me, you're a horrible kid, you want to do bad things. None of that matters. What did I say? No, I'm not asking you why any of this. I said you're not going, or you need to do, you need to do this, or you're not going to do this, and bump and run. And that bump and run, I think I can do that here, is like, I told you to clean your room. When your room is clean, come see me. And then you just walk away, right? And what they want to do is they want to argue, because if we can argue, then I don't have to clean my room. Or if I can argue, then when I do go clean my room, I don't have to feel bad about being a slob, because see, my parents are crazy. Part of what your kids are dealing with, particularly as teenagers, is they don't like where they are. They don't like being awkward. They don't like having people tell them what to do, but they also don't like not knowing what to do. So there's this internal awkwardness that goes on, and sometimes that comes out as arrogance and defiance. Still has to be addressed, but you address it the same way. Is your room clean? Well, no, but nothing else matters but yes or no. And so, is your room clean? No, but I always, and you walk away. And it's maddening to them. And they will throw a bigger and bigger fit until they realize they're not going to push your buttons, right? And that's where I go back to being in control. Now, let me tell you this. I didn't learn this the easy way, right? I learned this the hard way. Just like I have kids that are 4 years apart. Luckily, my oldest would respond when I got to a certain level, whereas my youngest would take it to the next level and the next level. And I had to realize, wait, he's just wanting to push my button, so he's not responsible for his behavior. And I kind of grew up that way. So I had to learn, when I married a woman that wouldn't put up with my business, she kind of did that to me. I'm like, wait, this is not working. If I can get you upset, then I'm no longer responsible for my behavior. That's what's going on with most teenagers, is I'm not comfortable in this, or I'm not comfortable with somebody telling me what to do, because I want to be able to make my own choices, but they don't know how to make those choices yet. So don't feed the fit for your little guys. And that's all the way up. And then sooner or later, don't feed the fit becomes bump and run. I want to watch this video. I want to do this. Did you clean your room like I told you to? Have you picked? We want to play this. Not until these things are picked up. or I want to go do this. Have you done your assignments? Have you done your work? Have you done the dishes? Have you helped with this? Because the rule is you can do that. I'm not opposed to you doing whatever you want to do, but you can't do that until you fulfill your responsibilities. And again, we always want to put value to it. We want to tell them, you're this and that, you're this kid or that. They don't know what they are. And there is a time when you sit down with them in a calm manner and go, when you do this, it seems to me that you're trying to hurt people or that you're trying to be disrespectful. And they need to have that explained to them, but most likely not in the heat of the moment, right? What you've got to, that goes back to being in control. And that is not easy. Believe me, I'm telling you, it's not easy. But I will tell you how much your life changes when now this child gets no control over how you react. When you're able to react in a controlled manner, instead of getting upset at the child for just doing dumb things that kids do, your life will begin to change drastically. Like I said, I'm not opposed to corporal punishment, but it's that end result. There are so many really kind of dastardly tools to use as a dad. It's like, oh, you want to push my buttons? Watch this. You just push my buttons. And they're like, man, I really don't want you lay out consequences enough and you get creative with your consequences. All of a sudden they're going to realize I really don't want to mess with dad because dad's pretty evil when it comes to laying out consequences. If we're just reacting all the time in anger and all that, then they're just figuring out dad's crazy and, I'm just going to push his buttons. There was another question about, let me see where that was.
Yeah, there was
yeah.
Someone was asking as well, how do you determine what's age appropriate in terms of consequences? You've got very young children, so.
Yeah, and I think all of that is absolutely a learning curve. And what I would do is give yourself some grace in learning that, because just like I said, so now you have a 1-year-old or a 18-month-old or a 2-year-old, and you're learning what is changing their behavior. And so then you say, okay, for an 18-month-old, this is appropriate. And then all of a sudden another kid comes along and it's not appropriate for that kid. And so 2 things. Number 1, you're going to do things negatively and positively that are inappropriate in the fact that didn't work, right? Like you're going to overstep your bounds as a parent, and you're going to discipline too harshly. Well, if that's not a habit, and give yourself some slack, give yourself some grace, and like, that was too much. I need to back off of that. Also, there's going to be times when whatever you use doesn't work the way you want it to. Give yourself some grace on that, because you are developing as a parent as your child is developing. And all we're trying to do as a parent is really to stay a step ahead or two. Because if I was to say, when a child is 9 months old, this is appropriate, it may not be for your child. And so this is where it's really important for you and mom, for dads and moms to get on the same page, not on how they see it, but what they hope to get. If you can say, I want my child to do this, then it's much easier to renegotiate back to that. What we want to do is we want everybody to see it the same way, and you just don't. Moms don't see kids like dads see kids. We have different roles, and it's very important that we do that. But we can agree on, what do we want them to do? Well, we want them to quit throwing a fit, and sometimes it's the dad that comes in a calm manner because mom's been maybe with the kids all day. Or sometimes it's the dad because I control everybody at work, but I come home and nobody's under control. That's a really hard challenge for us. We have to understand these people ain't getting paid, right? Your kids are not employees, and they can't be treated. All the management techniques in the world are not going to help you raise a kid. What's going to help you raise a kid is to know that child and know what their motivation is. And it's not evil, right? It's just their motivation, and it's developmentally. But they're going to develop at different times. And so, yeah, you try things. That's another thing about going back to corporal punishment. If that's the only tool you use, what they say, if you have a hammer, then everything's a nail. No, man, we want you to be artists with your kids. We want you to be, we want you to make this great masterpiece of an adult. And you got to do that. And you got to paint a little bit here and paint a little bit there. And then you got to relook at it, and you just keep painting. And then you find out what works for that kid, and you think you've got it down, and then kid will learn. And the kid has a different reason to do the things they do now, right? And so we're always having to change for that as parents. And I don't mean to dodge the question. I mean, be careful of being hard and fast about that particular kid. Like, all of us have seen kids that are like larger physically than the rest of their peers. They're taller, or they're just bigger framed, and it's really hard. That kid seems like they're behind or delayed. because our mindset is they're a large child. They look like a 7-year-old, but they're really 5. Well, they're acting like a 5-year-old should act, but we see them differently. And a lot of times particularly with their oldest, I think, and I take that very personal because of my relationship as the oldest child and relationship with the oldest child. We always kind of see that kid as kind of sometimes more than they are. And it's like, no, we need to back off and understand, what is this kid really doing? And you're still learning, and there's no real hard, fast rules for some of it. But if you look at it from a developmental standpoint, it begins to inform your decisions in a lot better way. So try something knowing that you might get it right, you might get it wrong, and then, innovate and renovate from there. Say, okay, well, when I did that, we really didn't get the result we wanted. So let's try it this way. And that's where you have the discussions with mom. Again, not about how you see it, because you're not going to see it the same way. That's a constant negotiation all the time. But you're going to say, what do we want from this child? And I think that's the problem that we don't always agree on, that we need to get to. We want them to go to bed. We want them to stay in bed. We want them, okay, but if they stay in bed but they're awake, why do we care? Well, they should be asleep, but they're not going to be. But if they stay in bed, that's our, and so you kind of got to negotiate with the child, but you negotiate with your spouse as well.
There's a question about someone finding it really hard to control their temper. So we've lost our temper with the kids now. How do we go about rebuilding then? How do we go about changing our approach?
Okay, let me take a breath here. Because I had a father who was very short-tempered. I've probably been hit, not beat, but hit. There's a difference, but not much, with everything he ever had in his hand. When we were working and I didn't do something right, he would lash out. The reason that I'm not completely scarred for my whole life is that almost every day he did that. Actually, every day that I can remember. Somewhere in there, he came in and apologized to me. Now, when you're 12, 13, and 14, and you're getting that same apology, I'm like, I got an idea. How about you don't do that so you don't have to apologize? But he really struggled with his anger. And that's where it did change. It was my little brother got less of that than I did. But that's really why we talked about all the things we talked about today. The reason we get angry for several different reasons. One, the main reason we get angry is because we have all this stress from all these other places. And that's just is what it is, and it's hard. So we do, like a lot of our life is not under our control. Actually, most of our life is not under our control. The only thing we can control is our actions and reactions. But when we get home and we have these children that look like us, sound like us, and have our last name, we think they ought to do exactly what they tell us. So you have anger because you have stress, and you've got to learn to manage that in some way. But one of the ways you reframe that is the people in your house are not out to get you. The people in your house are also not going to be under any more control than the rest around you. Your job as the father, really as a mom too, but as the father, is to kind of be the guy that can stand still in the tornadoes, because kids are tornadoes. They're constantly tornadoes. About the time one gets on a good development path, the other one becomes the tornado. The other thing is, this is a long-term thing. So I ended up having a really good relationship with my dad because he consistently and constantly, unfortunately, but consistently would apologize for his behavior. I can't think of any, like I would grab my kids up in anger and because I would stop because I remember how it felt. But I didn't do some of the things my dad did, but I remember how hard it was to apologize. So some of the respect I gained from my father was just how hard it was for him to come to me and apologize, like I said, almost every day. But that's where we go back to all the things we've talked about here, is your kids aren't out to get you. You're also not going to control your children. You're going to control the environment in which they live. That's your job, but that's also your opportunity. And when they don't do exactly what you want, just understand that's kind of how life is. And then, so you've got to regroup. The other thing is, when you blow it, it's not the end of the world. You don't need to do it every day, but your children will get over that because they're going to see you in the long run. And that's where a lot of times moms are like, you did that and it was scarring, and it probably was. But what you're going to do is you're going to overcome that with all the other good things you do. So my dad would make negative comments to me. I made negative comments to my kids. Our kids are going to deal with Negative comments. Our job as a parent is to give them 1,000 positive comments for all the negative ones they get. It's a constant job. Sometimes we're the ones that give the negative comments. Well, that has an impact on kids. We have to be careful of what we say and how we say it. Understand, you're going to do it. You're going to mess up. It's going to have an impact on kids. But what has an overall impact is your day-to-day showing up every day. If you're dealing with anger, show them that you're dealing with anger. Apologize when you do things inappropriate, and then try to do things that show them that you're working to control you. Because your children and your wives are not responsible for you being angry or not. No matter what they do, they're not making you angry. You're choosing to be angry. And that doesn't mean you don't get to be angry. I'm just telling you, it's your choice, not theirs. So one of the things you can do, and this takes time, and man, I think I'm good at it now because my kids left, right? But by what you do is by stepping in that every day and showing that, then you gain control over what you can control. You can't control a 4-year-old. You can control their environment. So what makes us angry is this 4-year-old's not doing everything I want them to do. Sometimes they're not doing it because we haven't expressed what we want them to do. Sometimes we've expressed it, but we haven't given them the opportunity to do that well. Like my dad used to ask me to do things that I couldn't physically do yet. Like, it's like, pick that up. I'm like, I'm 8. I'm not strong enough to do that. And then he would get frustrated because what he wanted done wouldn't get done. And so now he's mad at me. Well, I'm 8. And I think that was what we have to understand is on the development of, can I expect this from my kids? And if so, did I communicate it well? And if so, are they now choosing to do it or choosing not to do it? That's when I may want to get angry that you're making bad choices. But if they're not capable of doing it and I haven't communicated well, then it's not their fault that I'm angry, right? They're not making me angry. I've got to decide how I'm going to do that. The other thing is when you kind of remain that calm, and I have no problem with dropping some anger on the kids, on the family, or just telling the whole family, you know what, we're not doing this. There is a place to bring appropriate anger. But what we do is so many times that's where we discipline, and we've got to be careful with that. We've got to be in control. So the main thing is always be ready to learn, ready to grow, be ready to apologize. That's the hardest part. And know that while you're working on it, you're developing as your kids, and you guys are going to grow together. And yeah, they're going to remember some of those times. My kids still bring them up to me. But what they're going to see is that's not who my dad is overall. You know, what they're going to see is this is how my dad cared for me. This is how my dad took care of it. And those that are mad at you for those angry things, like they're like, there was no reason for dad to be that angry. They don't have kids yet. The funnest part for my dad was watching me deal with my kids and just kind of give me that look like, not that easy, is it? So understand there is that time when you'll be able to look back and not only show your own growth, but your kids will know that, it wasn't easy raising these kids.
Awesome. Thank you, Mike. I mean, as usual, that was really insightful. Thank you so much for tuning in.
Thank you, guys.
At this hour. And join us again for, we're going to talk about how dads are going to be so, crucial as well in the way they educate our children. We take our kids as well. And academia is a really big issue, I think, for all of us. And thank you. And good night. We'll see you soon.